Alright folks, after extensive testing, here is the final review of the Darksword Oslo. I've got a lot to talk about, so I'll try to not make this overly long. So if I start rambling, you gotta let me know. Oh, you mean like right now? Alright, let's take a close look at it. So this is the new version of the Oslo, not to be confused with the previous model, which was substantially different and is now discontinued. So this is the up-to-date one. And the price range is between $460 and $610 US, depending on what options you want. You can choose between blunt and sharpened edge. You can get either just the scabbard or a sword belt as well. And the blade is made of 6150 high carbon spring steel, always a really good choice. And the hilt, meaning the guard and pommel, are cast bronze. And before I forget, I should mention that this was sent to me for review. So even though I try to avoid bias, that's something you should know. Okay, first I want to talk about historical accuracy. Darksword says this is between 10th and 11th century. And for classification, the Petersen typology is very useful. It's pretty old by now, it's from 1919, but it's still widely used. And it looks like most like a Petersen Type R. Some people call pretty much any deviation from the idealized types ahistorical or inaccurate, but you have to keep in mind that there was quite a bit of variation in the Viking Age, or really in general. Said types are always idealized, and sometimes you find individual swords that don't really perfectly fit one type or another. Even if you narrow it down to, say, a decade, there would still be some variation. For example, this sword there doesn't look perfectly like an idealized Type R, but it is classified as a Type R, and it also has a bronze guard and pommel. Now, generally most Viking-era hilts were made of iron, but there are a few examples of bronze hilt parts as well. Sometimes you also find traces of bronze coating, so all bronze guard and pommel on this are not inaccurate, although not quite as common, and I've more commonly seen bronze plates being used for decoration. But yeah, either way, it's not out of the ordinary. And the type of decorative pattern also fits into the time frame of 10th to 11th century. The pattern on the grip, I'm assuming, is made up. It doesn't look very close to the common art styles of the time, but it's still close enough to not look completely out of place. The blade looks most like a Type 4 to me because of the elongated tip. A lot of Viking-era swords, especially the earlier ones, have shorter and somewhat rounded, or sometimes even completely rounded tips. The blade is 70 centimeters long and fits within the historical spectrum. The fuller looks a bit narrower. At the same time, there were also examples of surprisingly narrow fullers, so can't generalize too much. Anyway, so Darksword says that it's inspired by a 10th century hilt. So it seems like it's not a replica of a specific individual find. So it's designed to fit the overall style of sword of that type. And I think they did a pretty good job at that overall. I've found a number of originals that are fairly similar. Usually with this type, the pommel is, or the lower guard here, is straight rather than curved. And sometimes the upper guard is completely straight. This is a little bit flared out on the side. So you can find some details where it's a little bit mix and match. But overall, I don't think this would look terribly out of place at the time. So you'd have to really pretty much nitpick to find things that are not quite consistent with other swords all the time. As far as the handling is concerned, the weight is 1.18 kilograms or 2.6 pounds. So that makes it relatively light for a Viking sword. There are some examples that are fairly heavy. It gets up to, I think, 1.8 kilograms is the heaviest I've seen. So some of them are really quite hefty. So this is, feels pretty light. And the balance is about 13 centimeters or 5 inches from the guard. So again, very reasonable for this type of sword. And yeah, it handles very well. Right? When you pick it up, it feels, what people would generally consider well balanced. It's of course an overly general term. It depends on what type and what for. This seems like a good compromise between agility and power. Like, you can definitely tell that the sword has a certain heft and it wants to really hit hard, but at the same time it's not going to tire you out quickly. And I can, even just with wrist action, I can swing it fairly effectively. And of course that's not how you use it, it's more a shoulder powered cut. I'll get to the usage in a moment. I just want to point out a few differences between this and the older version. So the old model of the Darksword Oslo is 100 grams heavier, was made of 1060 steel. 5160 is a better choice in my opinion. It had a threaded pommel, whereas this one here is peened. And the older one was not very accurate. It looked more like, I don't know, kind of a failed Type K maybe. And this also got a much better, nicer looking grip on this one. It's now decorated. It's better shaped. It's got this taper here. The length of the grip, it's fairly long, but not all Viking swords had a super short grip. So you find some that, you know, gave you a little bit more space here. And it doesn't seem like it's out of the ordinary, really. It's not grotesquely overlong, as you sometimes see on poorly done reproductions. And this one also has a finer decorative pattern than the older version. Alright, so what about the cutting? The first impression that I had trying the sword on tatami mats wasn't very good, but then later I found out that this was not really the blade's fault, but mine. So I sharpened one of the two edges to have the comparison. And when I tried that again, it still didn't cut super well on most of the attempts, but the slow-mo shows that that's 100% on me. If you look at this here in particular, you can see that the edge alignment was completely off. So I have some trouble getting the edge alignment right with this kind of sword, because it sits differently in the hand. It is used different than a medieval arming sword and other swords that I've mostly practiced with. So you need to really figure out how to hold it. There's been a lot of discussion about how to grip a Viking sword properly. We don't have any manuals from the time, so it's all speculation, and anything has been proposed from a hammer grip without tilting the blade forward much, to a very pronounced handshake grip where you hold it pretty low on the pommel, to putting the thumb and or the index finger over the guard, and a bunch of things in between. Needless to say, what I was trying there didn't quite work out. The edge alignment was substantially off, so that really limited the cutting. However, when I tried it on the ballistic gel torso, it did a lot better. So different kind of target, and this is really more appropriate for a sword like this. This is not a light cutter. This is not something that you would just elegantly slice through stuff with. This is something that you hack into the target. Not saying that the Vikings didn't have proper martial arts techniques, but this is really designed for a powerful hewing action. Also to do damage to a body underneath mail, for example, you need a lot of heft. And so you need a fairly stout target with a lot of mass. And yeah, so in that case, it performs really quite well. And considering how these were supposed to be used, I can't really criticize the original edge that it came with. I sharpened it because it wasn't really suitable for tatami cutting. But you know, as it is, it's not impressively sharp, but it's not dull either. And the blade geometry is pretty good. And considering that, you know, this would meet shields, mail, helmets, cut into bone and all that, it's fine for that. And as the ballistic gel test showed, even the factory edge does pretty well against it. So I don't think for this type of sword you really need any more necessarily. Okay, so there are a lot of good things about this. It's fairly accurate. Overall, handling is spot on, really good. It looks very nice. It's definitely one of the prettiest swords I've shown, with the decorations and the grip also in particular. Very good looking sword, no doubt about it. Fit and finish are quite good. Really the only nitpick I have here is that the opening in the guard is a bit larger than I like, even though it doesn't really seem to affect the sword, because I've put it through pretty vigorous testing for the reason that Some people, including myself, have had issues with earlier swords made by Darksword Armory, so I wanted to make extra sure that there's nothing wrong with this. So I did some pretty hard testing with it. I've had 0 issues with it. There's really no edge damage. There's a slight bit of wear in one spot, but it's not even worth mentioning. So no chipping, no edge rolling, nothing like that. And the hilt is still completely tight. There's no rattle or clicking or anything like that. Nothing is loosened up. And from what I can tell, the tempering seems to be well done. It's still perfectly straight. It's got a nice spring temper, as you saw in the slow-mo footage. So all really good, including the scabbard is quite well done. It's a wooden core covered in leather. Now this one here has the sword belt as well, and this works perfectly. You pass these 2 straps through the slots here, and then you tie it. I'm not going to show here because you can't, with a camera frame, you can't see it on me anyway, but you can wear it quite comfortably. A little bit loose maybe. The fit in the scabbard could definitely be tighter, and it rattles around, so that's the one drawback here. I would definitely like to see a tighter fit, but otherwise the only other thing I can point out that could be improved is the cast is not the cleanest here on the bronze. Like, some of the details appear a little bit washed out, if that's the right kind of term. So it would be nice if that looked a bit more crisp and clean, especially considering the price range. Speaking of which, this is mid-range, and there isn't a whole lot to recommend there in this range. I mean, there's Deltin, which is similarly priced, but otherwise, Windlass, Hanway, etc. are lower priced, and then Albion Arms and Armor, etc. are higher priced. So this is really a good choice in that range. So based on my experience with it, I can easily recommend it. Sure, a few things could be improved, but I feel like this is really mostly nitpicks or criticisms with regards to what you can expect for the price. But this is a very functional sword. It's a good looking sword. Definitely a very noticeable improvement over the previous version. So yeah, good job, Darksword. Hope you enjoyed the review and found it helpful. Thanks for watching. Check out the links down below. I put the link to where you can get this sword. And yeah, that's it. Have a good one.